Geçer. Şu an yayındayız abi.
Evet,
çok
güzel.
heyecanlı değil mi?
Evet, çok heyecanlı. Herkese
Selamlar
merhaba.
herkese.
Evet. Herkese
Böyle
merhaba.
YouTube linkini atalım bu arada. Slay'e atalım Okan, senin az önce dediğin gibi hiç konuşmuyormuş gibi yapalım.
Yolla.
Nasılsınız bu arada? Nasıl gidiyor hayat?
Hayat güzel.
YouTube şeyini
Sen nasıl gidiyor?
Güzel gidiyor. Uğraşıyoruz evle şeyle. Kamerayı
Mesela-
şöyle yapayım. Daha çok ben olayım ekranda.
evet güzel. Daha iyi oldu kesinlikle. Ben mesela
Kesinlikle daha iyi oldu.
çok
Umut'un sesin az geliyor ya.
hemen açayım.
Evet.
Ufak bir ayar.
PM evet.
Audio. Şu an daha iyidir büyük ihtimalle.
Evet, hani.
Tamam.
Şöyle bir banner ekledim bu arada. O 27 kişi geldi bu arada.
Tamam.
Çok iyi.
Keynote start.
Evet. İstersen
Tamam,
Okan, sen bir GDG İstanbul nedir? Ben çok hızlı başlayalım abi. Sana direkt
Evet.
atayım bu topu böyle.
Tamam.
Sonra
Şimdi-
Umur bize Android Extend anlatsın. Sonra hadi abi biz goy goy devam ederiz diyor. Sen başla.
Tamam.
Ben...
Şimdi asıl yayının başlamasına aslında 12 dakikamız kaldı. Biz öncesinde bir toplanalım organizatörler olarak. Sizlere bugün neler yapılacak? GG İstanbul nedir, ne değildir? Bilenler için bir tekrar, bilmeyenler için de bir açıklama aslında yapmak istedik. Bunun yanı sıra Android Extend serimiz var. Birazcık ondan bahsedip yayına başlayacağız. 10 dakikamız kaldı zaten. Chat'le başlayacağız. Şimdi öncelikle bugün Chet, Murat ve Yigit bizlerle olacak. Chet Android hakkındaki yeniliklerden bahsedecek. Android 11 hakkındaki yeniliklerden bahsedecek. Ardından Murat privacy konusuna değinecek. Ve en son Chet, Murat ve Yiğit'in olduğu bir Q&A aslında bir soru cevap yapacağız. Live chat'ten gelen sizlerin yazmış olduğu soruları direkt bu konuşmacılara yöneltip yanıt alacağız aslında sizler için. Bu şekilde yaklaşık 2-2,5 saat süren bir etkinlik düzenlemeyi planlıyorduk. Son 10 dakikamız kaldı. Etkinliğimiz bu şekilde. Peki GG İstanbul nedir? VTM İstanbul nedir? Neler yapıyoruz biz? Biz aslında Google'ın bir geliştirici grubuyuz. Aslında bir topluluğuz. Sadece İstanbul değil, aslında Türkiye'de yaklaşık 30 tane bizim gibi chapter'lar var. Ve Google teknolojilerine ilgi duyan insanlar burada toplanıyorlar ve birlikte bugünkü olduğu gibi etkinlikler organize ediyorlar. Tabii ki de aslında bir mekan ayarlayıp mekanda hem tanışıp insanlarla hem de kaynaşıp iş arayabildiğimiz, yeni teknolojileri konuşabildiğimiz bir etkinlikler düzenliyorduk. Malum sebeplerden dolayı bu etkinlik serisini online seriye geçirmek zorunda kaldık. Dediğim gibi Google teknolojilerine aslında ilgi duyan insanlarız bizler. Sadece Android değil aslında. Firebase, Google Cloud, Flutter gibi teknolojiler hakkında da sürekli etkinlikler düzenlemeye çalışıyoruz. Her zaman destek olabilirsiniz bize. Her zaman ekibe katılabilirsiniz. Bu açık bir topluluk. Aslında Google'ın akrabası değil de komşusu olarak nitelendiriyorum ben bunu hep. Biz Google çalışanı değiliz ve bunu tamamen gönüllü olarak hiçbir kar amacı gütmeden yapıyoruz. Bunun yanı sıra sadece Google burada bizi destekliyor aslında. Maddi manevi işte bugün mesela konuşmacılar bizlerle olacak. Bu şekilde bizleri destekliyor. GG İstanbul tarafı bu kadar. VTM İstanbul tarafına değinecek olursak da aslında Google'ın teknolojide kadınların ön planda olabilmesi için, kadınların da teknolojide yer alabilmesi için oluşturmuş olduğu bir topluluk. Aslında bu GDG'lerle yani Google Developer gruplarla kardeş topluluklar ve birlikte etkinlikleri organize ediyoruz. VTM tarafı da bu şekilde, bu da Women Tech Makers diye açılıyor. Yine Türkiye'de ve dünyanın her yerinde çok fazla topluluk var. Benim en son baktığımda dünya üzerinde yaklaşık 600 tane GDG topluluğu vardı. Yaklaşık bunun yarısı kadar da sanırım VTM topluluğu var. GDG ve VTM İstanbul kısaca bu kadar. İsterseniz siz Android etkinliğinizden bahsedin. Orada
Yani
neler
güzel.
yapıyorsunuz?
Aynen. Yani güzel özetledin. Aslında kalabalık bir grup olduğumuzu ve kalabalık oldukça bu kalabalığın daha da büyüdükçe hani güzel olduğunu hepimiz gördük yani. Bu en kıymetli kısmı bizleriz. Biz de bir Android Extended diye bir seriye başladık. Aslında Android Extended daha önceden bir Android Coffee Droid gibi bir ismi vardı. Biz bir yerde 15-20 kişi muhabbet edip genelde Android ile alakalı yaşadığımız problemler üzerine konuşarak başladığımız bir etkinlikti bu. Nereden baksanız bir sene falan olmuştur aslında bu etkinliğin başlangıcı. Öyle 2 hafta, 1-3 haftadır yaparken vesaire bu zamanla ufak bir grup haline geldik. Araya korona girdi. Korona sürecinde de ya biz bunu madem öyle online yapalım dedik. İlk başta ne yapsak ne etsek diye düşünürken baktık ki belli konular üzerinden güzel sunumlar falan yapabiliyoruz. Aslında bildiğimiz şeyleri paylaşalım. Ne yanlış yapıyoruz, ne doğru yapıyoruz. Hatta yaptığımız yanlışları paylaştığımız, güldüğümüz komik anılar falan da oluyor. İnsanlar sorularını sorsun. Hatta bize katılsın. Biz de yayın alalım. Onlarla beraber tartışalım vesaire gibi bir konsept yapıyoruz. Umarım şeyden sonra, korona sürecinden sonra tekrar bunu fiziksel bir ortamda da tekrar yapmak isteriz. Güzel olur. Eski günlere döneriz. Yine kahvemizi alır, içer, sohbet etmeye başlarız.
Kesinlikle abi ya, böyle bir çarşamba akşamı, bir perşembe akşamı toplanıp kahvemizi içip böyle
Aynen
hem
öyle.
piyasada üzerine konuşup hem teknoloji üzerine sohbet edip bazen oturup kod yazıyoruz falan gibi bir işe dönebiliriz, bence çok güzel olur.
Ya
Umarım.
güzel oluyor. Ya konseptin çünkü ucu açık tamamen. Bu programda da yaptık. 2 seferinde hiçbir konu olmadan sadece girdik. Hadi sohbet edelim dedik. Birkaç soru geldi, bir şey geldi. Oradan konuyu açtı. Aslında tam bir sohbet serisi. Ve bir yandan da bazı belirli konuları ele alıyoruz. En son styling ve theming arasında farklar vardı. Mesela onları inceledik. Yeni çıkan şeyler olursa onları da inceliyoruz. Eski yanlış bildiğimiz şeyleri düzeltiyoruz. Bazen başka insanlar bizi düzeltiyor. Bunların hepsine açık bir ortam yani. O yüzden katılın da diyoruz yani. Bu serbest konuşma ortamı bayağı. Öyle
Rahat
özetleyebilirim.
eğlenebileceğimiz.
Etkinlik olduğu zaman de oluyor. En azından insanlar birbirini tanımış oluyor. Sektörde kimler var, kimler yok. Hem bunları öğrenmiş oluyorlar. Hem de yenilikleri takip etmiş oluyorlar. O anlamda bayağı güzel oluyor aslında.
Öyle. Hepimiz farklı yerlerde çalışıyoruz. Çok farklı işler yapıyoruz aslında. Yani hepimiz iki satır aynı şeyleri yazmıyoruz yani. Çok alakasız yerlerden know-how'lar birleşiyor. Bambaşka fikirler, bambaşka olaylar çıkıyor. Hiç ihtimal vermeyeceğim bir durumda olan birisi senin problemine çözüm bulabiliyor. Sana yeni bir katkıda bulabiliyor. Zaten topluluk olmanın gücü bu yani.
Kesinlikle. Peki Android 11 hakkında ne düşünüyorsunuz? Son 5 dakikamız kaldı. Android 11 ve yeni Jetpack komponentleri hakkında ne düşünüyorsunuz? İlginizi çeken bir konu var mı? Bugün en çok neyi merak ediyorsunuz mesela?
Düştü.
Güzel şey. 2 tane hadi abi oldu, o yüzden birini aldım. Android 11 Jetpack tarafında abi hani permission'lar bayağı değişiyor. Privacy olayları bayağı değişiyor. Benim onlar çok merakıma gidiyor. Çünkü permission'ların değişmesi bize muhtemelen servisler tarafında da bayağı den vuracak şey olarak. Yani bir notification göstermek zorundaydı zaten oralarda. Şimdi daha da sertleşecek orada kurallar. Ben oraları çok merak ediyorum. En heyecanlandığım şey bubble'lar. Böyle app'te güzel, hani picture çok kullanılmıyordu.
İzlemeyenlere spoiler
spoiler. Umur, sende Hadabisi'de neler var beklediğiniz?
Görmüştür herkes zaten bubble'ları vesaire.
Privacy tarafında Android'in ilk zamanlarında böyle her şeyi yapabileceğiniz bir işletim sistemiydi. Bu da zamanla çok fazla abuse'e uğradı. Böyle Android 5'ten itibaren bir privacy konusunda bayağı değişiklikler, kısıtlamalar gelmeye başladı. Bu her ne kadar developerlar için bazen zorluklar çıkarsa da son kullanıcı için kesinlikle gerekli şeyler. O yüzden ben bayağı memnunum yeni çıkan Android versiyonundan.
Benim de aklıma en çok privacy kısımları geliyor ya. Özellikle özellikle Android 10'da konum servisleri değiştiğinde ben çok mutlu olmuştum. Ki yani bu konum servislerini de developer olarak aslında kullanan birisiyim ama bir yandan da mutlu oldum yani, kendimle de çelişiyorum yani. 11'de de bununla alakalı değişiklikler gerçekten. Yani privacy kısmına gerçekten ben de odaklanıyorum diyebilirim. Ama yani konu çok uzun.
Evet.
Şeyle alakalı da minik spoilerlar da vermek istemem. O yüzden daha çok konuşmacılarımıza bırakalım demek istiyorum ben de.
Ben de şunu söylemek istiyorum. Şimdi önceki yıllara nazaran aslında bu yıl sanırım biraz daha az bir yenilik duyuruldu gibi geldi bana. Çünkü önceki yıllarda hep böyle wow işte muhteşem diyebileceğimiz bir yenilik çıkıyordu. Örnek vermek gerekirse Compose ya da Kotlin'e geçiş sürecimiz gibi mesela. Kotlin First dedikleri zaman hep böyle çok çok köklü bir değişiklik ya da köklü bir feature aslında yani büyük bir feature önümüze getirmişlerdi. Aslında bu yıl yani bu şekilde çok büyük bir feature yok gibi geldi bana. Sadece Dagger tarafındaki Hilt belki bu büyüklüğe girebilir. Onun
Evet.
haricinde evet yine feature'lar vesaire geliştirilmiş, yapılmış ama belki de aslında bu korona sürecinde olduğumuz için hepsini duyurmak istemediler. Bilemedim ama dediğim gibi önceki yıllara nazaran aslında benim görüşüm daha az yenilik duyuruldu gibi geldi bana. Ya da duyuracaklardır. Öyle diyelim.
Ya gizli
Evet
kalmış,
ya.
sessiz olan şeyler de olabilir. Bir developer olarak yani aslında Android 11'de gelecek olan ama bizim aslında hayatımızda bir şekilde adapte ettiğimiz Wi-Fi debug mesela benim hoşuma giden şeylerden bir tanesiydi. Daha
İsterseniz
önce,
son bir dakikamız ya.
tamam.
O
Evet.
Chat'i sahneye alabiliriz.
Biz de ayrılalım yavaş yavaş.
Biz o zaman çıkalım.
Her zaman bu arada sorularınızı live chat'e yazabilirsiniz arkadaşlar. Biz onları sizler için etkinliğin sonunda bütün konuşmacıların bulunduğu bir section'da hepsini soracağız. Yani elimizden geldiği kadarını soracağız. Ve onların da cevaplayabildiği kadarını cevaplayacaklar. Onu da belirtmek isterim. Çünkü gizlilik gereği bazı sorularınızı cevaplamayabilirler. Bunu da önden belirtmek isterim. Her zaman İngilizce ya da Türkçe hiç fark etmeksizin yazabilirsiniz. Biz onları sizin için translate edeceğiz. Aynı zamanda Türkçe soru gelirse Türkçe cevap verilecek. İngilizce soru gelirse İngilizce cevap verilecek. Bunu da belirtmiş olalım. Ve
Bol bol
chat'i
soru sorun arkadaşlar. Ben indiriyorum.
Now I would like to introduce Chet Haase from the Android team. I don't think he needs more introduction, but I will take him in. Hello, Chet.
Hello, I'm here. Am I in the room now?
Yes, you are in the room.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. It's really exciting to host such a great team in GDG Istanbul's event today. I will leave the stage to you now. Good luck.
Okay. Let's see if this works. This is my first one of these. So
we will be around if you need any help.
Okay. All right. Maybe you can do the presentation as well. That'd be easier.
Yeah, I wish I could do that, but
hey, everybody. Nice to be here. First, before I start, I wanted to apologize because the presentation is going to be in English. This is in Istanbul. I assume most people speak Turkish and would prefer that. But I know that this is happening online. I saw that it was spread very widely on Twitter. And so I'm assuming that there are other people that do not speak Turkish. So I will speak in English. Also, I can't speak Turkish. So if I tried to do it in Turkish, it would be very, very short. I should point out, too, that I'm about to give a talk. Most of this talk is already in the launch video that we released last week, the What's New in Android. It is very similar content. So if you saw that, be prepared to see it again. Or if you want, you could go to YouTube and play that at 2x and then come back and join for the next talk. Also, I wanted to say that Yigit has asked me to come to Istanbul and participate in a similar in-person event for a couple of years now, but it never worked out. So then when Murat mentioned that this was happening, I was all in because then I didn't have to fly 20 hours to get there, and I didn't even have to put on shoes. So I'm happy to be here. Let's go. This is What's New in Android. I'm Chet Haase. I'm on the Android Developer Relations team. I did UI toolkit engineering work for years and years. I was on the same team as Yigit, and now I do more stuff like this. All right. So the question is, what is new in Android? So I'm going to talk about mainly the things that are new in the platform, Android 11, but I will also talk about some of the enhancements to tools for Android Studio and related things, and also talk about some of the changes in libraries, Jetpack, Android X libraries along the way. So first of all, let's start out with my favorite area, UI. There were changes to Windows insets. This was long overdue in coming. We needed to deal with the reality that there are lots of different kinds of windows. So before, we used to give you information about the rectangles on the screen, just the pure insets information, but you didn't really understand where that information was coming from. But it's really better to be able to react to things like, where is the status bar? Where is the navigation bar? Where is the IME? And so we've deprecated a lot of the pre-existing APIs in window insets, and instead we added APIs that are more specific to these types of windows, like being able to query what those windows are and get information specific to those windows. And the way you interact with it is you get the window insets object from the listener calls you back, and then you can get information. You can actually find out if the keyboard is visible now. Who knew that that was something that everybody wanted for the last many, many years? So now you can actually get that information and even find out information about how big that thing is and where it is on the screen so that you can react accordingly. So the question is, why do we make these IME changes, or sorry, the window insets changes now? And part of the reason was because we wanted to enable the new Ime animations, which is by far my favorite feature in the release. Now you can get that information about the keyboard as it is coming on the screen and actually react to it, or you can even drive the changes yourself. So instead of just finding out that the keyboard appeared on the screen and then you have to react to it, you can actually drive the animation and synchronize the animation of your content with the animation of the keyboard itself. So here we see an example. This video, I think, is taken from the sample that Chris Baines developed. You can access the code so you can figure out how to do all this stuff. On the left, you'll see the keyboard animating in, which is the default action. And as it pops into view, it animates into place, and the content in the application can now animate with it because it gets information updates about where the keyboard is and how large it is so that it can move the content appropriately. On the right-hand side, we see something even more interesting where the user is scrolling the content, and we can drive the animation. We can drive the position of the keyboard directly frame by frame by frame. And once again, the transition of these things is synchronized, so you can move the content and the keyboard at the same time. So these two modes of interaction, you can see here in some code. If you want to simply react to the default animation of the keyboard, you can set a callback, and then in the callback, you get these lifecycle events about where the thing is, what the progress of the animation is. On the other hand, if you want to drive the animation directly, you can create this animation object and give it information about what kind of interpolation you want, how long you want it to last. Here, we're actually not setting up a fire and forget animation, but rather we are driving it frame by frame. So we're just setting up a simple linear interpolation animation. We have a cancellation signal, which allows us to cancel it if we need to along the way. And then again, we get lifecycle events about cancellation or finishing or starting or whatever. There is that sample that I mentioned, so you can go check that out and play with the code so you can put this in your application. One of the big elements in the Android 11 release was around people, and this came in various areas. There's something that we call conversations, which is the ability to populate notifications with information that are specifically about people. Imagine messaging apps where you want to get back into a conversation with a person, and wouldn't it be nice if you did not have to click several times to get back into the app and then go into the deep parts of the app to get to that conversation? Instead, we can propagate that conversation directly into the UI by putting it in the notifications. And then you can set information specifically about each of those notifications. So you long press on one of these items and you can set information about how you want to be interrupted or the priority of this. And if you make this, so for example, that third conversation there, if you make this top priority, then it'll pop up to the top. So that is always, in top of mind when you're looking at your phone, if that is the most important person that you want to keep communicating with, and then you can dive back into that conversation when you want. So to set these things up, you populate information about the person. Person API is actually from previous release, but we're sort of tying all these things together into the overall concept of having people propagate in the UI in a much larger way. Then you create a long-lived shortcut and push that, and then create a notification using messaging style, which is a requirement now, and then push the shortcut info into the notification itself. So this also relates to bubbles, and bubbles were there in the previous release in Android 10, but now they're there for real. They used to be a developer option, but now they're enabled by default. And so I should point out too that the user has to opt into these. It's not that bubbles just start appearing all over the UI. So the user, when your application would like to post a bubble, then the user can opt into that experience. But the important thing is you're already pushing information about notifications. Hopefully you're adding information to be part of the conversation UI. And at that point, also enabling bubbles is just a little bit more on top of that. So you can see in the sample here, these are screenshots that came from a sample that Yuichi Araki posted, and I have a link to that later. So if you tap on the bubble on the left screen, then it pops up this mini activity. So what are the things that you need to do to enable that? Well, first of all, these are some of the stuff I already said. In Android 10, they were a developer option. Android 11, they're here for real. We should point out that this should take the place of what a lot of apps were using System Alert Window for. System Alert Window is this transparent object that appears over the entire UI, and then you can put things within it. Not really the experience we're going for on the system. Instead, we'd really rather have you use bubbles, and the API is much more tuned for what most applications need. As I said, you are already creating those notifications, but you need two more pieces of information. One is metadata about the bubble itself, and the other is a dedicated activity. So as you saw in the example before, you tap on the bubble, and then this little mini activity pops up in the UI. So it's not a deep link into the application itself. You're not going back into the app, but instead you are basically popping up a new activity that is integrated with the rest of the overall UI on the phone. So you can see the way that we do that is, first of all, we need to make our mini activity resizable, because as you saw, it didn't take up the entire screen. So the device needs to do the right thing with that UI. Then you create this mini activity, the intent there, you create metadata about the bubble, and then you build your notification with that metadata. It can only bubble if you actually have the shortcut set and you use the messaging style. This is a requirement of conversations overall, including when you use bubbles. So a couple of things to check out. One of the launch talks was what's new in System UI. It has much more information about all of this stuff and more. The sample that I mentioned, Bubbles Kotlin sample in the Android samples. And also we talked to the Bubbles engineering team recently. That podcast episode was posted, I think, last week. So check out episode number 140. All right, so I would like to tell you about privacy. I'm not sure I'm allowed to. So one of the things that we realized as we make more privacy changes to protect user data and make it more transparent to the user what is going on, is that in some cases, it's difficult for developers to know what is going on. Let's say you're working on a really huge application with many, many other developers, or maybe you're pulling in external libraries, and then the user is being asked for permissions that don't make sense for your mental model of what your application is trying to do. And it can be tricky to track these down in a very large and complicated and old code base. So now we have something called data access auditing that makes it easier for you to figure out what's going on. You basically create a callback that is triggered whenever one of these user-sensitive privacy pieces is access. So you create this callback and you set that on the app ops manager, and then you will get notified when one of these actions occurs, and you can get the call stack to the code and trace it down. There's also the ability to tag pieces of your code so you can get more metadata about the information when that information is requested. One-time permission. So this is interesting. in the previous release, we had the ability for the user to opt into location permission only when the app was being actively used. And there were so many people that were interested in using that as opposed to, sure, granted all the time, that we took it a step further in this release and allow users to select to opt into only allowing that permission for this use of that app. Right. So you're in the app, it says, I need this location permission, and the user can say, yep, grant it now, and then take it away later. So basically the app will have that permission as long as it's in the foreground, and then very briefly as it goes into the background, and then the permission is removed. One of the important things to note about this is hopefully it actually doesn't mean any work for the developer, because if you're already using best practices for permissions, then you need to handle this kind of situation anyway, because at any time, the user can go into settings and disable permissions, right? So your code should ideally already be able to handle the situation where, sure, they granted a permission, but then eventually they took it away, which means that you need to get it again. So this is just another version of that same situation. Background location is getting more restrictive in Android 11. It used to be the case that you could ask for background at the same time as foreground or other permissions, but now we really want to make it very explicit to the user what is going on, especially if their location information is being used or retrieved in the background. So now, if you want it in the background, you need to ask for it in the foreground first, and then request it in the background, and that will take the user to the system settings where they can set that. And this is, again, trying to provide more transparency for the users so that they can actually see what applications are getting their location information. So it's not an in-app UI that you can simply pop up and they enable it there. Instead, takes them to the system settings to make it all very concrete and visible what's going on. Foreground services, there was a requirement in Android 10, where if you wanted location in a foreground service, you needed to register that in the manifest. Android 11, same thing, plus camera and microphone as well. So you need to register this foreground service type, and then you can use one of these 3 or 4 flags to enable them. And you can do them together. Like in this example, we need a foreground service for both the camera and the microphone. Okay, so there are many other privacy changes that are worth checking out. One is package visibility. So it used to be the case that you could find out what other packages were installed on the device. This might not be something that the user really wants any application to be able to do. So now there are restrictions about the applications that you can find out about. And you need to declare in your manifest for your application what are the packages you would like to query. Again, it's all about transparency. Scope storage, there were more changes there. If you target Android 11, it is no longer there is no longer the legacy option. You need to actually opt into scope storage as you migrate to Android 11. We have made a bunch of improvements that should make that easier than it was in Android 10. For example, you can now do batched editing. You can also access raw path names instead of having to go through Media Store for everything. And then the raw path names, basically, they're implemented on top of Media Store capabilities. So it's all a consistent approach, but it should be easier for people to move to the new approach from existing code. And finally, there's the notion of auto reset permission. So what if a user installs an application, runs it once, it asks for a bunch of permissions, and then they never run it again? And in the meantime, that app has permissions that maybe they're accessing in the background as a service, whatever it is, and the user doesn't even know because they installed it so long ago. So now, if that application is not used for months and months for some period of time, and that may change over time, I'm not sure what it is exactly right now, but a long period of time, then we'll simply reset those permissions. Again, your application should be doing the right thing anyway. So hopefully you don't have to do any work here, but you should just be aware that your application may be asking for permissions again in the future if they take a long time running that app. Since the last time you got those permissions. So there were a bunch of things that we did in the release specifically to make development of Android apps easier. We've been hopefully doing this over the last several releases, and certainly that is one of the reasons that we have Jetpack and Android X libraries to begin with, is to make development easier. But some of those things are Wi-Fi debugging. So people have been asking for this for years because, frankly, there are never enough USB ports. I have 4 things plugged into my laptop here. If I had to plug in another one, then I'm going to need a dongle, and then you daisy chain these things. Actually, that is a picture of the laptop that I'm using right now. That is not faked. So I think everybody has this situation, especially you get a new machine that only has 1 port or 2, then it's really hard to deal with. So Wi-Fi debugging, check it out. It is not enabled by default in the tool. I believe it's in the 4.2 Canary of Android Studio, so you may be able to play with that soon. But in the meantime, you can enable it manually through this UI, and then there's some command line stuff as well. And you need to pair and connect manually. But the goal is to eventually have that as an easy option in Android Studio as well. Nullability annotations are all about helping you find your bugs at build time instead of runtime, right? So we've been adding nullability annotations over the last several releases, and we did the same in this release as well. There are 2 categories of annotations that we add. There's the recently category, recently nullable or recently non-null. These trigger warnings. So it won't break your build. You can still ship your app, but maybe you want to know that this could be a problem, right? If you're going ahead and shipping it anyway and not fixing those problems, then there's a chance that at runtime, your code could call with an improper parameter and cause a crash. So why not fix it now when you have the opportunity? If an annotation was recently in a previous release, let's say Android 10, we may have upgraded that to be full-on nullable or non-null, and that will actually trigger a build failure. So if your code is calling it with a parameter that is not proper for that annotation, you will get a build error, and you must fix your app now, which is work, but it's not as bad as crashing at runtime. So crash reasons, speaking of crashing, we are making it easier to find out what happens in the real world. So one of the tricky things with applications and testing and debugging is I can have a beautiful developer setup with, the device or 2 or 3 or even 10, but that cannot possibly mimic what is happening in the real world with, hundreds or thousands of possible devices out there and all kinds of configurations and locales and who knows what is going on those user devices. And then you find out that your application crashed, but you can't get all the information about that crash. And so it's hard for you to A, reproduce, and B, debug. So now we have an API where you can actually query why your application crashed, and then you can upload that information and take a look at it. So you can say, get historical process exit reasons, and then ask what happened. Did we run out of memory? Was there an ANR? Was it just a flat out crash for accessing something improperly? And then we can log that information, upload it, put it in our servers, whatever we need to do. This is something that you can use directly as an application developer. We encourage you to do that. There are also crash reporting services that I'm sure a lot of you already use. They can also use this. One of the ideas is this is providing more fine-grained information, especially for something like ANR. It's a little hard to get that information right now. You have to kind of connect the dots right now. But if we can provide that at the platform level, then it's easier for crash reporting services eventually to use this and get even more information that they can provide you with. GWP ASAN is it's an enhancement on something that we released in Android 10 called HW ASAN, which was the ability for you to find out when there was a bad memory access. This is for native developers, where we basically would put this new memory allocation system in there. And then if you accessed memory improperly, let's say you free a piece of memory and then you try to use it again, then we would trigger that. We would trigger a log and you could find out about it. We crash your app and then you get all that information, which is great. But there was a fair amount of overhead, both in terms of size as well as runtime, for having this, duplicate memory allocation system on top of the existing one. So this was clearly meant for only being at debug, test, build time in the developer's setup. So now we offer GWP ASAN, which is really intended to go onto user devices. Instead of overlaying the entire memory system, it's a sampling approach. You can think of it as like the sampling profiler, where it doesn't look at everything. It doesn't overlay everything in memory, but it just overlays a sample of the allocations. And then if you happen to trigger one of those, again, the same thing will happen. Your app will crash. You'll get a crash report, and that will get automatically uploaded. So it may not catch it everywhere because it is just a sample, but when it does, it provides really good information from the user, right? From the real world situation where these things happen. And that is really difficult to do otherwise. Low overhead. I think the size of the library that you ship with is, I don't know, 60K or something. And then the reports are auto uploaded to play. So you basically opt into it. GWP ASAN mode equals always. And then if there is one of these bad accesses, your app will automatically crash. A report will be logged, and then that report will appear in your play dashboard automatically. ADB incremental is for developers that have really, really big applications. Think games, right? So if you've got a couple of gigs of information, a couple of gigs being packaged up as part of your app, and you want to fix one line of code and then push it down to the device to test it, then you have to wait for 2 gigs to be pushed onto the device. The idea with incremental is, let's not push everything. Let's push only the pieces that need to be pushed to actually get the app running again. Up to 10 times faster to install the entire app, and even faster than that if you just want to install the minimum set of information. Again, probably not worth it for everybody, but certainly if you have a really big application, and again, we're thinking games with all their really huge assets, this could be really beneficial. Here's how you use it. You sign with this different signature mechanism, and then you install -- incremental, and away you go. So there are a bunch of behavior changes. Some of the privacy stuff that I talked about recently, and certainly over the last several releases, we know that it's difficult for developers to deal with this stuff, reacting to us changing behavior, basically protecting users more and more, users and user data. But that means that developers have to change their code to react to this stuff. So we're trying to make that easier as we go, and certainly in Android 11. So most of the behavior changes that I talked about and that we've implemented in the release are limited to when you target this release. So when you eventually target R or Android 11, you will need to deal with those, but you don't have to do it out of the gate. We're not changing it for all the apps that are running on the device. Also, we have toggles for you to be able to test these behavior changes one by one. One is an approach using the command line, which was the case in previous releases, but there's also a new UI and developer options that you can use. So you have these 2 approaches. You can see the UI over on the right, or you can use the command line using the ADB shell am compat commands. So you can see when you execute that, then it automatically disables it, which you see in the UI on the right. In the graphics and media area, there were several changes for some of them for native developers. So if you are an NDK developer using native code, if you need to decode images right now, there were a couple of different approaches. One is you could call up through JNI. Basically, all of our decoders were at the Android SDK level, which is a little funny because all of the code for decoding those is actually in native code. So we use the Skia library for a lot of our graphic stuff, including decoding. And Skia is entirely native. However, we never exposed those APIs at the native level. They were always exposed at the SDK level instead. So you would upcall, and then internally we would then downcall into native code. So that was one approach. You've got this nice, beautiful native application, then you have this JNI code just to decode images, or people would just bundle external libraries to do their decoding for them, which has the problem of just bulking up your APK size, right? You're basically duplicating effort that we have in the platform because we did not expose these APIs. Well, now we do. So you can use all the decoders that we have already at the SDK level, but you can use it from NDK code. So here's a small example. So you create this image decoder, and you set up the appropriate formats, and you need to allocate a buffer for the image to be loaded into, and then you decode. That's basically it. We have a sample for that and other NDK stuff, which you can check out in the Android samples. HEIF files are have a new capability of being animated, or of us being able to load these animated images. So we could already do that in the last couple of releases for GIF files, GIF. Now we can do it for HEIF files as well. So it comes in as an animated image drawable that then you start. Fairly straightforward. One of the advantages of HEIF is it can be a lot smaller than these other file formats. So you might check it out for that. So it works something like this. You have a file and you create a source from that asset. And then not on the main thread, you will get a warning or an error in Android Studio if you try to do this on the main thread. Decode the drawable. This can be a really expensive operation. So bad idea to do it in the straight ahead code as I'm doing here. And then if it is an animated image drawable, that means that there were multiple frames and it did come in as that file format, and then you can start the animation. If you are doing audio developments, again, as a native developer, then you may be using OpenSLES, which was fine, but going forward, that is now deprecated and we have a better approach. So we have an open source library called Oboe, which is all about faster, lower latency audio. It's unbundled and it works in previous releases. It's about high performance audio in general, including lower latency. It goes all the way back to API 16, which is hopefully far enough for all of you. And you can check it out on the Oboe site. Also, we talked to the engineering team recently on the podcast, talked to Don and Phil. So check that out if you want to know more about how to use it and how it works, and audio in general. Always interesting to find out how things actually work under the hood. Variable refresh rate is interesting for a couple of reasons. So since the dawn of time, devices have basically had about a 60 hertz refresh rate. I think there were a couple when I started in 2010 and 11 that were maybe 55 times a second that they would refresh the screen, but otherwise pretty dependable 60 frames a second, which meant that developers had almost 17 milliseconds in order to do all of their work to get that UI posted on the next frame. One of the problems is these applications with their own rendering loops, think games, again, if they were doing so much work that they could not finish that work within that 16.67 milliseconds, then they would have to drop their frame rate. So instead of posting on every frame, they would have to post on every other frame, effectively getting 30 frames a second, right? So the interesting thing with the variable refresh rate devices, so now there are these devices that run up to 90 hertz or even 120 hertz, double the frame rate that we're used to for the last several years. Not only can the user get this smoother experience, but also there are more flexible backoff rates. So in this case, if a game cannot reach the top frame rate that they want, they can back off to something that is not as bad as just dropping in half, because basically the higher refresh rates means there are also higher backoff rates and more flexible, more plentiful backoff rates that are possible as well. And so there are a couple of different APIs that you can use here, both at the native as well as the SDK level, such as set frame rate. And what happens is you are asking, it's kind of a hint to the system. You are asking the system, hey, I'd really like to run at the following frame rate instead of the default. And then the system will collate the requests from possibly multiple windows on the screen, because you may not be the only window that is visible at the time, and then they will pick the most appropriate frame rate to run at for all of the applications. Thermal API is, again, for native and especially games and high performance situations, the ability to detect whether there are bad things happening with thermal, which can then affect performance, right? So it's not just, well, I don't care if the user's phone is warmer. No, you do, because warm means either, shut down if there's really a problem, or they're going to start killing stuff or throttling CPUs, and then you're going to have to deal with that situation instead. So we have API at the Android SDK level, but again, you have to do a JNI upcall for that. But now we have an API in the NDK. It works something like this. So you've got a listener, and then when the status changes, you can find out exactly what's going on there. And you can set the listener at any time, and then you need to unregister, unset it later when your application is shutting down. Angle is a library that we wrote that you can use OpenGL, but it runs through the Vulkan driver instead of the GL driver. It is not enabled by default, but if you want to see whether this is appropriate for your application, if you're going to get better performance, then we have a UI in developer options where you can toggle this and see what the effect is. There are a few other things that are worth mentioning really quickly. NN API has the 1.3 version that just came out with the platform. Various things going on there, including lots of new features, lots of new ops. Hard swish op is my favorite because it just sounds cool. I don't have any idea what it means. There is control flow stuff like the conditionals and loops, which make the language much more powerful. The programming model much more powerful. There's also the ability to control memory domains. So you can allow memory to be reused. So these tensors don't have to be constantly moved between GPU and NPU, which, you know, the copy overhead can be kind of extreme. There's new samples in the NDK, so check those out for more information there. Lots more information. Also more information coming out in, I'll talk about this soon, the Android, 11 weeks of Android events. We're going to have one dedicated to machine learning, so check that out. In 5G, you can optimize your app to take advantage of this new higher bandwidth carrier capability that's coming out. You can find out about the meteredness and the bandwidth to see whether you should take advantage of it. So you can basically see whether the user is on an unmetered network, so you can really sort of optimize the resolution, the density, whatever it is you're going for a higher experience for your media app, your game, and you can also find out whether you're on a fast network. Improvements in biometrics. These are, I'll show some platform APIs here, but the intention is to also offer these in a Jetpack library, and then you can access these in a backward compatible way. So you start off getting a reference to the biometric manager, and then you define the strength that you want. And then you can find out whether that strength is available, and then authenticate the user appropriately, and otherwise, if they're authenticated, then you can do the right thing. Autofill, this is interesting. So you know when the keyboard pops up and it has suggestions, then you have a UI on top of the keyboard telling you suggestions, and then up above that in the content of your application, if Autofill has a suggestion for something, it has its own UI. It would be great if they were actually the same UI, and now they can be. So the Autofill system can take the information about suggestions that it has and then populate that into the keyboard itself. And this applies, so there's possible developer changes both for the keyboards themselves so that they can integrate this content. We can have it in the default keyboard on these devices, but if you ship a keyboard app, then you can look at adding this to your keyboard as well. But also for password apps. So they're going to have this information that they give to Autofill, and they can then provide this information to show up in keyboards that opt into it. It's important to point out that this is secure. We're not actually passing the content itself, the information about that password to the keyboard. Rather, we are passing UI information so that it can be presented in the keyboard. So the keyboard doesn't have access to the content. It has access to the UI that shows the content. So here's a small example from the Google keyboards. Normally, if someone has information about email, that would pop up in a little drop down in the UI, but instead it can show up as a suggestion in the keyboard down below. Same thing, credit cards, mail addresses, whatever. On the keyboard side, you need to handle a request from the IME for a suggestion request, as well as the response. On the password app side, this is where you need to provide the information that then gets sent over to the keyboard. So you handle this on fill request. You create a data set just as you always do. And then inside that data set, or rather, then you create a fill response with that data set. And then the right thing will happen in the autofill system. There were very briefly some non-platform changes, not related to Android 11 on Jetpack. I hope everybody knows it's already a huge suite of libraries that we offer to make Android development easier. More importantly, to make Android development possible across many releases instead of just the latest platform release and latest platform APIs. We push new versions of these libraries in developer, pre-alpha, as well as alpha, beta, and RC and stable. Every 2 weeks, there are new releases of some set of these libraries. So they're coming out constantly. If you are not looking into them actively now, I would suggest you do so. Lots of different capabilities across the board. Some of the new stuff that we've done recently includes HILT, which is the recommended approach for doing dependency injection on Android. It's built on top of Dagger with the Dagger team, but very Android specific. And paging 3. So we've had paging for a while. It's been completely rewritten in Kotlin with coroutine support. Makes it much easier to use in your Kotlin development. And also Camera X, which has been out since I think it was I/O last year. It just went into beta. So API stable, please check that out and start using that. Should make camera development, preview, taking pictures, analysis, all that stuff way easier and also more dependable across not just versions, because it supports multiple versions, but also across the device ecosystem as well. And tons more stuff in Jetpack as well. Jetpack Compose is the future UI toolkit for Android. I say future because it is currently pre-alpha, is still developer. I think developer 2 release just came out last week. It's a reactive programming model and it's written in Kotlin, coroutine support, all kinds of capabilities it's taking advantage of in the Kotlin compiler and the language itself. It's being developed in the open, so please check that out. And play with the tutorial and samples. In Android Studio, there's 3 releases to care about right now. 4.0 just went stable. One of the really cool things is motion editor. So we've had motion layout for a while, but it required you to write code. So constraint layout, it can get a little bit tedious in XML, but at least it's, just a layout itself. But you get into motion layout and now you're writing animation code in XML and it gets a bit tedious and you have a hard time taking advantage of some of the really powerful capabilities of this library. It was always meant to be used with a visual tool and now there is one. So check this out, go use Motion Editor and create nice, rich animations for your UIs. Think of it as transitions, the transition API on steroids, right? It's basically the ability to say, I have a before state, I have an after state, and I can scrub between them as the user scrolls the UI, or I can create a really custom, powerful animation to go between these states. Layout Inspector was substantially rewritten to have capabilities like a 3D view that allows you to understand your containment hierarchy much better, as well as the ability to command click through on property values to find out where did this resource come from and how did it get set, which is helpful because otherwise it's a little difficult to figure out, why did that color not get set when I thought I did the code that I was supposed to. 4.1 is in beta right now. Database Inspector allows you to see what's going on with the database on a running app. So you can make changes in the app and see them show up in the tool and vice versa. So play with that back and forth, much more powerful for the SQLite that's running there, whether it's raw SQLite in your application or you're using Room to wrap that capability. 4.2 is currently in Canary. I mentioned some of the capabilities earlier as we went along, like the wireless debugging that we saw, as well as if you do want to play with Jetpack Compose, you will need to use a Canary build of Android Studio. So 4.2 is going to be the version for you. We've been doing a lot for games and are continuing to do more. There's a games SDK that you should check out with the Jetpack library that allows things like frame pacing, setting the right speed for your game, frame rate for your game, as well as performance tuning tools, where there's also profilers, GPU profilers in Android Studio. There are some interesting betas that game developers should check out, including development extension for Visual Studio, if that happens to be your workflow. then that might be worth looking into, as well as GPU Inspector. So check out that URL for more on games. On the Play space, the big news there is a rewrite of the Play console. It should be like, it basically got very cluttered and confusing, powerful, but cluttered and confusing over the years. And they rewrote the whole thing to make it much easier to use, as well as adding in a lot of powerful features. There's a policy status section. There's a section where you can get reports on the acquisition of all the users. There's a place where you can manage the team of people on your application that have access to it. It is now in beta, and you should check that out. I wanted to call out some resources, so that's the end of all the actual content. But I would encourage you to check out all of the launch videos. I've been sort of binging those this week myself. And this has deeper information on everything that I talked about today, as well as much more. Right. So go check out Roman's Compose talk if you want to see examples of how this thing works. Go check out Yigit's talk on Jetpack to find out more about Hilt and Paging 3 and much, much more. So go watch those. They just came out last week and are available for you. Also, 11 Weeks in Android starts next week. So if you go to this URL, you'll see all the content for the weeks that are coming up. Next week is people and identity. So there'll be a lot more information about conversations and bubbles and all the other stuff going on in system UI and for people's overall capabilities overall. The week after that, machine learning, much more about NN API and TensorFlow Lite and MLKit and on and on. So check out that site for more information about those. The Android 11 meetups, I shouldn't have to say this because this is one of them. Actually, this is the first. So congratulations, Istanbul. You have the first Android 11 online meetup. If you want to see more like this, I'm going to do this talk at some of these, but we also have other talks that other people are going to do, as well as communities doing their own talks. It's just a chance for us to get together in a way that is physically possible right now, given the situation. So check out that site to find out what else is happening. And finally, I wanted to call out to Now in Android. One of the things that I find confusing about Android development is that the team is constantly coming out with new stuff all the time. New Android X libraries, new articles, new samples, new code labs, new platform features, new Android Studio, whatever it is. And it's a little hard to follow all of it. So every couple of weeks, I try to combine everything that I've been able to track down and put it into a single article, which I then record into a video and a podcast and publish those. So check out Now in Android at any of these places and consume the format that you prefer. And that is it. Thank you. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry. I didn't unmute myself. Thank you very much for the summary. There are really great changes in Android 11 and in all the platform. I want to mention that I am really fan of Now on Android. We have a small show, and whenever we don't have anything to talk about, we just open it and go through it, which is great. We wish you see you in Istanbul in person as well. You would have to travel, but
I would like that someday. I look forward to traveling again when we can.
Yeah. Thank you very much. See you on the Q&A.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Now, I want to introduce Murat. He is also on Android Developer Advocacy team. And welcome.
Hey, hello everyone. Good
Hoş
to be
geldin abi.
Hoş bulduk.
Bu kadar da Türkçe konuşabilirim. I will leave the stage to Murat. Have a nice presentation.
Thank you all organizers for this to be happening. And as you could guess, I'll be speaking in English. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in Turkish, and we'll address them in any language you want. But the talk will be in English, so Chet and rest won't be just bored until we go to the Q&A. As we mentioned, I'm Murat, a developer advocate for Android, and today I'll be talking about privacy changes on Android 11. Privacy has been evolving over the last several releases of Android, and the same trend continues with Android 11. We heard your feedback after Android 10, and that actually helped us a lot to evolve our platform to bring even better protection of users' data. Today, I'll be talking about new enhancements in Android 11. Let's start with permission changes and one-time permissions. That's super exciting for me. I don't think anyone here watching this stream likes to share more private data than necessary with their apps. I can't see the hands, but I have no doubt you don't want to share more data than necessary. We also see that there are many apps which request background location access, although they don't actually need it. So we asked our users, what other types of data are important for you? Based on the feedback, in Android 11, we are bringing more granular control over users' private data on location, camera, microphone, and also significantly limiting access to background location. When an app requests location permission, users will be able to grant one-time permission access without giving them full-time access. This also applies to microphone access. Let's imagine a conferencing app. In current situation, I'm pretty sure you all use it all the time, but let's imagine a more normal time where you rarely use the app. And you don't want to give the permission all the time. To perform a voice call, users will be given the option to allow record audio permission just for one time. And similarly for camera access, again, let's assume the same app also supports video calls. When the app requests record video permission, users can choose to give the permission only once. So the big question, you might be wondering if you need to do any changes on your code base. The good news is you don't, well, as long as you are following the best practices. Let's see some code. This is a pseudocode which would work for most permission requests. Here, when the user taps the location button, what happens here is the permission request follows the best practice. First, we check if the permission is granted. Next, we let the app decide to show an in-context UI explanation. When you request the location permission, this prompts a system dialog offering the user three options. In this case, let's say the user denied the permission. In the denied case, the on-request permission result callback will be invoked and the permission is rejected. So now it's your turn to explain which functionality in your app will not work because the permission is missing. In this case, you can show an explanation such as in a snack bar to indicate that some functionality will not be available for the user. In Android 10, we give users fine-grained control. We split permissions between foreground and background location access. We highly encourage you to incrementally request these permissions. This gives users better understanding and better control. And there is a lower chance the user simply rejects you because you're asking too much from them. First, ask for foreground, then all the time location access. And now with Android 11, this pattern has become a requirement. For foreground access requests, there are no changes. And this should be enough for most apps. For background access, there are two changes. When you target Android 11, as I mentioned before, it's a good practice to incrementally request permissions. So your users have a chance to understand and also decide based on the app functionality, because they will be interacting with the app and they will be seeing you really need that permission to function. So instead of asking foreground and background together, you should only ask for background location after your app has given the foreground access. Again, as I mentioned, this pattern was recommended in Android 10 and has become a requirement in Android 11. Second, when your app requests background location permission, the system will no longer show regular permission request dialogues, and the request permission API will send the user directly to the settings screen. So make sure you tell the user why you need the permission before requesting the extra permission. And also make sure to provide the option for the user to refuse, since there is a rate limit of maximum 2. So as you can see, we tried to make this as easy as we can for developers. There are no new APIs, and your app controls the UI process during whole request flow. If you're targeting Android 10 to ensure compatibility, it's still allowed to request both foreground and background location permissions in one shot. That's not recommended, but that's something we support for compatibility. If you do that, an extended dialog will be shown to the user. If an app hasn't been used by the user for several months, in Android 11, the system resets your app's permission. Chet mentioned this a bit. This is pretty much like how the user resets your app's permission in settings. And again, if you're following the permission best practices, you shouldn't be needing to do anything. Your app needs to check the permission before accessing the sensitive data and request if they don't have the permission. This only affects apps targeting to Android 11. And now let's talk about an API to discover potentially unintended access to private data. If your app needs to access private data, you need to be really transparent to your users. Here we have some drawings which I'll be talking about. We have some private resources of the device as shown in the green boxes, and your app code will be accessing them. Let's take a look at the challenges faced by developers in understanding data access in their own code. First, large apps are usually written by large teams, and often they have orphaned code. Accidental data access can happen. If you are using a closed source third-party SDK, these libraries might access private data without your knowledge. And they can actually do this by using the permissions your app already granted. And as you can see, it's not always really easy to identify if these accesses are intended or not. With Android 11, we provide 2 new APIs to let developers control over their app's data usage. First, we provide a callback when the data is accessed. And on top of that, we allow developers to attribute access to logical features within the app. Let's go back to previous drawing. Whenever an app calls an API to access private data, the system calls into a collection handler before returning to the caller. So the collection handler can collect a stack trace to record which code performed the access. Let's take a look at the API. Here you can see how to set up a callback for data access through AppOps Manager class. If you want to consistently track this through entire app, you can set this in application on create. Or if you want to localize it to a particular part of your app, you can do it inside the activity on create. Your app will be notified of any synchronous or asynchronous access calls. Complex apps may contain multiple distinct features. For example, let's imagine a mapping app that might have a navigation, explore nearby shopping, and find friends feature. In Android 11, we allow you to attribute a subset of the app to a feature. Each feature uses a different set of private data. To give an example, Find Friends feature probably needs location and contacts, but does not need to use the microphone. Features as a higher level concept instead of just areas of code makes it easier to find what features have accidentally data accesses. Also, this will make it easier to explain to the user what private data is used for. This data auditing API allows you to attribute data access to features. Let's see how to do it. To attribute features in your code, first create an attribute context and give it a meaningful name that represents your feature, such as in this case, Find Friends. Then you can pass this context to API calls. And within the data auditing callback, you can find the attribute through attribution tag variable. We added a new foreground service type values, microphone and camera, for apps to access these resources in foreground service. The concept of foreground service types is introduced in Android 10. Apps can declare they want to access the data within its foreground service. In Android 10, only two types of those service types were enforced. Media projection, which is mostly used for auto, Bluetooth, TV, and other device connections. And location, which is mostly used for GPS, map, navigation, location updates, and so on. There is a couple of new additional foreground service types in Android 11, and one of them is camera. Actually, since Android 9, apps can no longer access camera in the background, so this can only be done in foreground for a while. If your app targets Android 11, you additionally need to declare the new foreground service types, else the foreground service cannot receive data. Here is the manifest entry for camera. If the foreground service needs to access another resource, you can declare them together, such as if you need to use microphone with the camera, you can declare them together, just like this. Okay, to recap, on Android 11, if you need to use a foreground service to access any type of this data, you must declare the corresponding foreground service type in the manifest. Now let's talk about changes to package visibility. This API allows an app to see which other apps are installed on the device. Android 11 includes some changes on how apps can query, interact with other apps. For some common scenarios, you most likely don't need to make any changes. Let's take a look at few examples. If you target Android 11, this API will return package info for your own app, as you would expect. If you are looking for the system packages, this will still return certain system packages as well as your own app. If you send an implicit intent for another app to take action, such as using the image capture intent to take a picture using the pre-installed camera app, if there's more than one eligible app, in this case, the system will show a dialog for the user to choose which app they want to handle. If another app calls your app's content provider and expects results, again, without any changes, your use case should work and your app can query and interact with those apps. Besides these scenarios, if your app tries this, you will get a name not found exception. And you will get this exception regardless of whether the app you are trying to get is installed or not. So we are basically blocking you to ask for another app to see if another app is installed or not. If you need to explicitly interact with another app, such as invoking an activity or binding to a service, you need to declare the new queries element in your manifest. The declaration also explicitly specifies the packages your app needs to query and interact with. With this, the app can now query com.example.store and bind to its services. You can also declare, as you can see here, multiple package entries under queries. If you need to interact with intent, you can do this with an intent filter signature. This app now query for all apps that handle an action sent intent for JPEG images. Also, if this app calls get installed packages, all apps that handle action sent intent will be shown in results. So you can still access them over the get installed packages API, as long as you have the declaration. In practice, we see that most apps can easily express necessary package interactions with intent and package declarations. If you have a specific use case to require querying all packages, please let us know. We would love to hear your feedback on different use cases, and we are listening to your feedback. Sometimes you want to take users directly to the default native app that can handle the URL instead of just firing a browser with that intent. If you set a new flag activity require non-browser, then the intent is only handled by the default native app. If the native app is not available, this will result in an exception, activity not found exception. Now it's your turn in the exception handler to take over handling the intent, such as displaying the URL in a web view or give an error. There is another similar intent flag called flag activity required default. This flag says there must be one default app that can handle the view intent. Else it also results in the same exception, so you can decide what to do. And now let's talk about scoped storage. Before the scoped storage in Android 10, there were two types of external storage, app storage and shared storage. And any app with storage permission had access to all these shared storage. Android 10's scoped storage changed this by separating media files and other documents. Now apps only have access to media files rather than having access to all files in shared storage. If the app needs to access to other documents, it needs to ask the user to grant permission specifically for that document. These are specific to scoped storage changes from Android 10. We received lots of feedback from you, developers, and by the way, thank you all for this. We heard developers need more time to migrate, so we provide a temporary opt-out mechanism. You need to add request legacy external storage manifest attribute, and your app will opt out from scoped storage. In Android 10, you need users' consent to edit or delete media which is not contributed by your app. To do this, you must use the media store APIs, which triggers a dialog. And if the user accepts, you will get a callback in your app, and you can access the file either with the media store API or with the file path. There is a change with this. In Android 11, we are improving the user content flow for editing and deleting media. So instead of popping one dialog per request, now you can batch multiple edit and delete requests in one dialog. We are super excited about this. This was the most popular request from you in Android 10, and this should actually significantly improve the user experience in your app. Let's see some code. To use the API, you first set the content URI and create an intent, then call start intent sender for result. And if the user grants access, you will get the result. With action open document tree intent, apps can no longer access some files in some folders. These folders are root folder of the internal storage volume or SD card, downloads directory, Android data directory, and Android OBB directory. You can also no longer use action open document intent to request accessing individual files from the directories Android data and Android OBB, including all their subdirectories. In Android 10, direct file path access was locked down, and we asked you to use Media Store for accessing media files. Because Media Store lets the system better manage file access, and it's more performant in most cases. But you told us that this is not always possible, which now we can understand. For example, this is important for apps using third-party libraries such as FFmpeg. In response, we are enabling this in Android 11. Direct file path access for media provides a native file-like interface to Media Store. This allows apps and libraries to continue using file APIs to access media content. If you need this, your apps needs to opt out of scope storage with the manifest flag. If your app has a use case that truly requires broad access to files on external storage, in Android 11, you can declare manage external storage, which will allow you to request the user's permission to grant access to all files in settings. This is needed for some apps, such as file managers, which need to work on your files, or apps which do backup and restore data. However, if your app requires to access a single file or several files, you should just use the storage access framework. Make sure you check out the Google Play guidelines for apps that need this permission, and we would love to hear your feedback on your app's specific needs in this area. And some other changes. Before Android 11, the read phone state permission covers both phone states, such as if the phone is currently idle or ringing, or you're in a call, as well as something more private, such as the phone numbers you called or you get called from. If your app targets Android 11, the permission become more fine-grained. If your app only needs phone numbers, you can declare your permission like this. You only need the read phone state permission up to API level 29. And above that, you need to request the read phone numbers permission to access the phone numbers. And with this, now I guess we can move to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Murat. Now I want to welcome to Chet Haase and Yigit Boyar for the Q&A session. You can ask your questions on the live chat. Sorularınızı Türkçe ya da İngilizce live chat'ten sorabilirsiniz. Konuklarımıza sırayla soracağız. İlk soru, çoğu insan bottom navigation ile navigation component'ı birlikte kullanırken zorluk çekiyor. Her item'da fragment yeniden oluşturuluyor. Bunun üzerinde çalışmalar var mı? Ya da önerileriniz nedir?
Should we translate this for chat? Okay, fantastic. Okay, nice.
I didn't quite get it. I was close.
Wait, did the translation help, or you still didn't get the question?
Oh, that is the translation. See, I can't even tell if it's a translation.
I will be not translating this, and Chet tries to answer this, but we already.
Okay. Should we take this in Turkish or English?
If a question comes up in Turkish, it would be good if you can answer in Turkish.
Sure.
There are some questions asked in English. You can answer them in English.
I guess this one was in Turkish. I remember.
Yeah, the first one was Turkish and we translated.
All right. I'll move Turkish now. So bu navigation problemi üzerine çalışıyoruz. Ya ne yazık ki fragments böyle 8-10 senelik bir komponent olduğu için bu multiple backstack navigation'da fragment'in mevcut mimarisi için çok sıkıntılı olduğu için çok uzun sürüyor. Ya hala yapıyoruz. Benim umudum işte 3. çeyrekte belki bir alfamız olabilir. Hani yani yılın ikinci yarısında bunu otomatikman handle eden bir mimariye geçmiş olacağız inşallah. Ama bunun yapmak için fragments'in büyük kısmını yeniden yazmamız gerekti. Çok fazla insan da kullandığı için bu zor bir değişiklik olacak. Yani sonuçta insanlar onun bazı bug'larına workaround'lar yazdı. O tarz kütüphanenin nasıl çalıştığını değiştirmek bayağı sıkıntılı bir konu. Ama yapacağız yani. Bu bizim için de önemli bir şey. Hani böyle bu kadar genel bir pattern'ın kolay olmaması bizi de sıkıntıya sokuyor. O yüzden çalışıyoruz. Azıcık daha canım dişinizi sıkıyor.
What Yigit said.
He said we are working on it currently.
I said Chet will release it next week.
Sure.
Okay, the next question is, what do you think Dagger Hilt is recommended while it's in alpha state? We have 2 questions here. Maybe we can answer the first one.
I guess this came in English, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Dagger Hilt, even though it's an alpha library, it is not a new library. It was a library that already existing in internal Google code base. And when we wanted to do something similar in Jetpack, we realized, we discovered that library. We're like, why don't we just work together and to make it a public library? It is not exactly the same because Google has different development practices. So we've been working on it for a year to make it easy to use for external developers. Like we added integrations with Jetpack components, and we have also added a Gradle plugin to make it easy. So the fundamentals of Hilt is already being used in Google applications. So even though it's alpha, it's not like that much of an alpha. We are using it on production. YouTube uses it, Gmail uses it. So that's why we are comfortable to say this is the recommended approach. But that doesn't mean the alpha is the final. Like we will make API changes very likely because when you develop a library for a single company, you can make a certain assumptions that we cannot make when we make the library available for everybody. So there will eventually be iterations on the library based on how people use it, but the fundamentals are very sound and we are very comfortable with them. And that's why we are able to recommend it out of the box.
And
Okay.
the first part is you can use Dagger and Hilt side by side. So if something doesn't work, you can fall back to Dagger and you can come back to Hilt when things are better.
Actually, I'm really happy someone asked that question because I was wondering the same thing when I saw, I think, Manuel's talk or maybe your talk in the launch and heard the word recommended. And I thought, we don't normally do that. So I'm glad you qualified why. Because certainly we're not recommending people ship applications using Compose, which is pre-alpha, and even, beta release as well. It's beta because it's not done yet, right? So please try it and make your own decision. But I think this is in a different category.
Thank you. The second question is, does Hilt have any other problem other than compile time?
Maybe it has bugs. We don't know. It probably does. Yeah, this stuff like the compile time, even the compile time performance, we tried to measure it. That was one of our goals. But we realized we measured a couple of applications compared to Dagger, or like not just like copying the code Dagger would generate into the application. And in some applications, it doesn't matter at all. And in some applications, we have seen the Java compile time go like more than 30%. Not the whole build time, just Java compile time. So we, after like not being able to get any consistent numbers, we decided to not go that path because it will really, really depend on your application, how you use Dagger and how many modules you have. But rest assured, we are working with the Android Gradle team to get some new APIs so we can speed up some parts of the whole processing pipeline. But that will take some time. But like performance is very important for us. It's including your build time performance. So we are always looking for ways to make it faster.
I went through the code lab for migrating Hilt from Dagger, and there were also a problem when you have your own custom scopes. You cannot use it directly with Hilt, I think. You should have to use it with Dagger. That's also, I think, worth mentioning.
Yes,
if you like to migrate.
Yeah, it's actually possible to add scopes, but it's slightly more complicated. Like that's how we built our scopes as well. But you have to fit it into the existing scope hierarchy we provide in Hilt. Like we did UX research on these things, and what we concluded was it's so rare that people really, really need real scopes. And like think about it: if Gmail can use Hilt, if YouTube can use Hilt, that they're fairly complicated applications. It may require you to change a little bit about how you organize your Gradle component graph. So I understand it's not trivial, but it's quite like we are pretty confident that the model Hilt test scales well, and hopefully, like over time, we will invest in these things where people can much more comfortably add their own scopes if they really need it. But first, we need to truly understand the problem. Like, what are the use cases that were not a problem for Google, but it will be a problem for a different application, so that we can try to tackle that problem.
We use some custom scopes. Maybe we need to be more educated about how to use the scopes. Maybe we should look at the documentation more and see.
Should ask Murat. He's responsible for Hilt.
Also, make sure you check the other code lab, which goes through starting from Hilt, and it has more documentation on the scopes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sonraki soru, Türkçe İngilizceye geçerken de böyle bir garip bir şey oluyor. Sonraki question falan. Sonraki soru, navigation component argümanlarını view modele inject etmenin best practice nedir? Yani bu da aslında
I think Chet can answer this question. He has understood the question. Yeah, it's hard to explain this in here. Right now, we are working on. So there's a couple of things. One of them is you can get the safe state handle that already includes the arguments, and you can get the arguments from the safe state handle. That's the easiest thing. It does add more coupling with the navigation and the view model, but like the UI and the view model, but they usually couple, so it's not that big of an issue. We're also looking at making assisted inject part of Dagger. That will make these things easier to implement. Actually, already internally have it, but again, like making it a public API is more complicated. So you might see some advancements here to make it easier. But right now, I think the only options are you either pass them as parameters provide to your hilt graph or use the save state handle.
Thank you very much. The next question is in English. Does state flow kill live data?
I hope so. No. It is like, so we are, just to be very clear, like we are working with JetBrains on that design and like at least reviewing it to make sure whatever we have a vision for live data to solve, that Stateflow can cover it. And we'll probably end up recommending people to use Stateflow the same way we recommend people to use Kotlin coroutines now. The issue is that not everybody uses Kotlin coroutines, or not everybody uses Kotlin. So I don't think live data will go away because we don't want to leave people forced to learn either Guava or RxJava if they don't want to use coroutines. We'll still be flexible, but if you follow the practices we recommend of like using Kotlin coroutines and the Kotlin language, you'll probably end up using Stateflow and not need live data. But there's still time for that to happen. And like we have lifecycle scopes that almost gives you all of the functionality anyways with Flow. So it's pretty close. It's quite possible. So my recommendation is if you're in the Kotlin coroutines camp, try to use Stateflow when it's available. But if you're in the Java camp, either use RxJava or Guava, and if you're not even using them, just use live data. I will keep supporting it.
So I have a follow-up question. If it does kill live data eventually, once everybody is using Kotlin and coroutines, does that mean that you don't have anything else to do? You created live data, right? So does this take away your job?
I didn't think about that. Is there any position available in DevRel?
You can figure that out.
We'll consider it if you want to submit your resume, sure.
I'll try.
Sonraki soru Türkçe. Paging tree Stateflow desteği gelecek mi yoksa state'in operatörünü mü bekleyeceğiz diye bir soru gelmiş.
Yani şu an şimdi Paging Tree Alpha 1 baştan yazdık library. Yani bayağı bir şey değişti. Stateflow daha experimental. Hani elbet gelecektir ama ne zaman geleceğini şu an söylemem mümkün değil. Paging'de practical olsun diye şimdi sharing operator da yok henüz Flow'da. Biz bir tane cache diye operator yazdık. Hani böylece page'leri kolaylıkla cache edebilin diye. Ya elbet gelecek ama ne zaman gelecek işte, yani onlar ne zaman stable olur, paging ne zaman stable olur, onları ayarlamak biraz zor. Buradaki sıkıntı, biz bir library stable yaptığımızda artık unstable API'lara depend edemiyorsun. Dolayısıyla bizim beklememiz gerekiyor ona desteği eklemek için.
Teşekkürler. Sonraki soru Türkçe. Android developerların hayatı kolaylaşıyor mu, zorlaşıyor mu sizce? Bu yenilikler bizleri sürekli yeni şeyler öğrenmeye itiyor ve eskiye göre çok fazla şey öğrenmesi gerekiyor gibi geliyor.
Chet, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, but I'm not going to answer it in Turkish. Maybe you could translate my answer if you want. Should we go word by word? Okay, so life of Android developer is getting easier or harder. Yeah, I like this question. I think the complexity in the early days was there's a lot of stuff that everybody needs to know, and it's really complicated to use, and you need to deal with diversity of ecosystems for devices as well as releases. And all the new bug fixes and capabilities were being put in the platform. So like that was the old Android. I think the intent for the way going forward, especially with Jetpack and a lot of the new capabilities and the tools, is to simplify a lot of that. Now, what we can't do is make it easy because there is necessarily a large surface area of stuff that developers need to understand to write applications, right? You do need to have some idea of what activities are, of navigating between, the fragments of your application. Like, just there's a lot of things going on in a rich application. However, the actual APIs that we're coming out with and the way that you use those to interact with the system, that should be getting easier and easier. And I think a lot of great steps started with the stuff that Yigit started with architecture components, right? Not just the fact that we now put the stuff in an unbundled library so that they work across releases and across devices, but also that they are solving some of the really complicated problems of platform development. You still need to understand what a life cycle is, but you don't need to handle all of the weird corner cases and probably not handle them correctly because it's really complicated. Instead, you have things like live data or eventually stateflow to deal with this instead. So yeah, we are releasing more all the time. And I think more always means complicated because then how do you learn it? But I think hopefully the stuff that we're releasing both in the platform, but even more so in the Jetpack libraries should be simpler than the ways that we used to recommend the developers or the developers used to have to use. I want to call out too a couple of other examples that I think are going strongly towards simplifying things. One is certainly Kotlin. So the ability to actually use coroutines means, well, you always had to deal with asynchronous stuff going on, and then you've got callbacks all over the place coming into random parts in your code, and that is necessarily complicated. The ability to have a much more reasonable or able to reason about approach to asynchronous programming, I think simplifies a really hard problem. And I lost my train of thought. And the language overall, like just the ability to use Kotlin means a lot less code. A lot of problems can get caught at build time instead of runtime. Taking problems that have dogged the development community for years and simplifying them or making them go away. So we do release more stuff, but the intent is it is more stuff that makes it easier to use overall. Oh, I remember the point I was going to make was Kotlin Extension. So we can't change APIs because that would break applications, right? We can't just change, we can't remove constructors from view.java. But what we can do is we can introduce extension methods like we're doing in KTX to improve the APIs and to point people to use those instead. So we can say, okay, well, this was really complicated to use in the past, but now there's a better way of doing it, which we can take advantage of given the capabilities of that language. So yeah, we strongly believe that it is getting easier. I think that we cannot remove the surface area. We cannot, reduce the surface area of Android APIs that exist, but we can certainly release APIs that are easier to use, and we can help point developers to the things that they actually want to use instead. Sorry, I'm going to keep talking because I haven't talked long enough on this. There's another talk that I'm going to start giving soon called Modern Android Development, which is a phrase that we've used for a couple of years now, where we're, over the years, we've released these, well, there's a language and there's KTX and there's new tools and there's new stuff in distribution. There's certainly all the new Jetpack APIs. But I think one of the things that maybe we need to help with is trying to help people understand the mental model of what they actually need to use to write Android applications. Because if all you have is a browser and you do a web search, it's a little hard to figure out what are the pieces that you actually need to learn and use versus what are the pieces that make that easier. And so I think, especially on the outreach side in DevRel, we can try to make it easier for people to understand how to develop these applications, whether you're a longtime Android developer and you just need to use new practices, or whether you are new to Android. Can we do a better job of pointing you at the things that you need? I don't know if you, and then I asked you to translate that. Okay, so could you translate that entire thing? Actually, what's the Turkish for whatever Chet said?
So
I
don't know if you had anything to add to that. I probably spoke long enough on that subject.
I'll add something really short in Turkish. Bir de şöyle bakarsak bu yeni bir şeylerin gelmemesi eskiden bu sorunların olmadığı anlamına gelmiyor. Mesela Work Manager yokken Work Manager gibi bir şeye ihtiyacımız yoktu da çıkınca oldu gibi bir şey yok. Hatta Yiğit'i benim keşfetme hikayem odur. Onun bir library'si vardı. Job Scheduler mıydı Yiğit adı? Öyle bir şeye ihtiyacım olmuştu ve open source ararken bir de Türk yazmış falan deyip alıp onu kullanmıştım. Sonra da işte bir konferansta karşılaştık, hatta onunla ilgili konuştuk falan. Aksine platformda olmayan şeyleri dışarıda farklı ve standart olmayan yollarla yapıp o şekilde çözmeye çalışıyordunuz. Şimdi bu tip şeylerin içeride daha official ve desteklenir standart hallerde olması bunları ekstra öğrenmeniz gerekliliğini değil, zaten eskiden de çözdüğünüz sorunları bugün daha standart bir şekilde çözmenizi sağlıyor biraz da.
Biraz da sanırım uygulamalardan beklenti de çok arttı. Mesela motion layout'un yaptığı şeyleri çok eskiden yapmayı düşünemezdik bile. Bubbles yeni yayınlanan bunlar biraz zor şeylerdi. Onları da bayağı kolaylaştırdığını düşünüyorum. Yeni architecture component kütüphanelerini.
Şu Chet'in söylediğini çevirmeye çalışalım mı? Geçelim.
Anlamış
Bilemedim.
Ya hani Chet'in söylediği zaten hani Murat'ın söylediği çok benzer bir şeydi. Hani bir de önemli olarak eklediği bir şey vardı. Chet'in başlayacağı Modern Android Development Modern Android geliştirmesi adı ne? Öyle bir tane seri var. O seride amacımız hani yani normalde mesela ben geldim Android app'i yazacağım. Neyin olup olmadığını bilmeden neyi kullanman gerektiğini bilmesi çok zor. Yani hani o guidance bayağı sıkıntılı. İşte MED'deki amaç da hani bak bunların farkında olmanız lazım. Bunları da bu library'lerle çözebilirsiniz. Zaten buradaki hani en kritik şey Murat'ın söylediği, yani hani bu library'ler yokken lifecycle problemi yok muydu? Vardı. Hatta biz lifecycle problemi olduğu için o library'yi yazdık. Ama sonuçta eskisini atamıyorsun. Eskisi orada. Kimisi onu kullanıyor, kimi öğreniyor. Yani bizim için de büyük bir dert mesela. Framework'taki fragmentleri deprecate etmek bile çok uzun sürdü. Yani async task'i bile deprecate edemedik biz. Edemiyorsun yani. Hani çok küçük insanlar kullanıyor. Biz onu ettik. Bir sürü insan tepki gösterdi falan. Bir de diğer önemli şey, ya Android'i ilk yazdığı zamanlarda ben Roman'a sormuştum. Niye Android'de Activity'de Configuration Change'de yeniden başlatmanın iyi bir fikir olduğunu düşündünüz diye. O dedi ki yani o zamanlar ilk Android'i tasarladıkları zaman zaten genelde keyboardlar fiziksel keyboard var ve döndürdüğün zaman UI çok değişiyor. Biz de dedik ki zaten UI çok değişiyor. Bari biz onu kolaylaştıralım. Hep değişsin UI configuration içerisinde. Öyle geldi yani. Ve şimdi bakarsanız telefonlar çok daha güçlü. Eskiden işte 200 kilobayt allocate edeceğim diye korkardık falan. Şimdi öyle dertlerimiz yok. Yani bir de teknoloji değişiyor işte. Kotlin var, coroutines var. Teknolojiye ayak uydurmamız gerekiyor. Yani gerekmediği zaman hani çok old school, geliştirmesi zevkli olmayan bir platforma dönüşür Android ki eğer yani insanların bizim amaçlarımızdan biri hani insanlar kodlamaya Android'le başlayabilsin. Yani Compose'da falan mesela bunlar çok önemli. Bizim bunun kolay olması lazım. Dolayısıyla sürekli geliştirmeden olmuyor işte. Yani 15 sene önce düşünememişler bugün nasıl olacağını. Çok nedense.
Teşekkürler. İsterseniz sonraki soruya geçeyim. This question is in English. User who want to use Kotlin multi-platform cannot use Jetpack components. Do you have any work in this field? What's your suggestion?
So I'll take the question. So we are watching Kotlin multi-platform first of all. We have really good collaboration with JetBrains, and We want to support it, especially on tool side. It is just not trivial. It's not like changing a Jetpack library to a Kotlin multi-platform has lots of ecosystem impact. You know, you have existing users who doesn't want to get Kotlin dependency, and then you have to convince them to get the Kotlin dependency. Or, you know, some of the APIs are difficult to port. Like those APIs rely on the Java programming language, like the clone method in ArrayMap. So when you want to port ArrayMap to Kotlin multi-platform, suddenly you lose the clone method. And what happens to existing applications? So there's some complexities there, but we are working on it. We're like trying to understand, okay, where is the demand? Like this kind of stuff is important to whenever like you talk to Googler'lar, it's good to ask this question here, so we get an understanding that there's people are concerned about this. And I would personally very much like to port most of architecture components into Kotlin multi-platform, but we cannot leave other users behind. So it's a significant amount of work. And meanwhile, Kotlin multi-platform is a moving target, like especially on the native side, a lot of stuff is changing. So you might see more in this area, but it will take a long time for us to be in a place where we can recommend you how to write multi-platform applications using Jetpack.
I think the approach that we would recommend right now is basically just stick to the business logic. I talked to one developer who was pretty happy with that approach, just writing the generic business logic, which that developer said was about 90% of the code base in their application. Obviously, it differs between applications. So he was putting the UI and the platform specific stuff in a different module, and that was about 10% of the code. And he was pretty happy with that approach. And I think that's probably the place, that's the way to view it right now until some of those hard problems are solvable that Yigit was talking about.
Thank you. Bu soru Türkçe. Conversations notifications'a göre öncelikli gösterilecek. Bu abuse edilebilir mi? Conversation olmayan bir bildirim conversations altında çıkartılabilir mi? Diye bir soru var.
Çok hızlıca cevaplayayım. Abuse edilebilir mi? Bir kere conversation'ların real time, o an gerçekleşiyor olması lazım. Tek yönlü olma şansı yok. Yani bir notification gibi uygulamadan size gelme şansı yok. Bidirectional ya da multidirectional olması lazım ve mutlaka birden fazla kişi arasında oluşuyor olması lazım. Yani öyle bir chatbotla conversation açıp notification gibi gösterme şansınız yok. Dolayısıyla abuse edilememesi lazım.
Teşekkürler. Next question is in English. Will launcher apps have restrictions on accessing lists of apps installed?
So actually, Murat, I don't know if you know more on this. It is, I mean, we recognize that there are some apps that do need access to all applications or all packages, such as launchers, file viewers, whatever. So there is a facility for requesting access to all applications. I think there was more information about that in, actually, I don't know if you addressed it in your privacy talk, but I watched one of the privacy talks from the launch where they talked about that. It's basically providing more information in your manifest. And I forget the process for, I think maybe there's a manual review on the Play Store side to make sure that your application actually needs the access that it does, as opposed to just requests it and gets it. So I would recommend watching the privacy talk from the launch event last week to get more information on that.
I guess this question showed up while Murat is talking. So thank you very much. Next question is English. We can't access the views aren't direct channels of the motion layout, I think because of XML structure. It can be difficult to control views. Will Compose support this kind of flexibility?
I'm not sure I understand that question, actually. You can always get the views in the view hierarchy by walking down the tree. Maybe it's that views have to be directly accessed by the layout itself, as opposed to being buried in a hierarchy below the layout to be animated. I'm not sure. I also don't know the details on what Compose is doing for transitions. I know that animations and transitions are being built in from the beginning in Compose, but I don't know the details on how they're going to work.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question is for Murat.
Cookie'yi getireyim.
People want to see cookie.
Cookie. Cookie gel oğlum.
Most important topic today, Murat's dog.
Yes, so we saved it to the last.
Cookie.
Wow.
Wow, Cookie's a lot bigger than it.
Well, he needs a haircut.
Yeah, he does. He looks like Rod Stewart, right?
I just need some of those leopard skin pants.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess it's the end of the day. It was a pleasure to have you in GDG Istanbul's events. Hope to see you in the other events as well.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this. Thanks for including me.
Teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler. Görüşmek üzere. Herkese iyi akşamlar. Sizlere de iyi günler diyeyim. Görüşmek üzere.
Teşekkürler.
Sağ olun. Görüşürüz.